Ready? Welcome back to Fabrication 101. It's great to have you guys back here. We are back in the shop and we're going to be working on the Bronco. In the last video I kind of mentioned what we'd be working on. I finally got myself an air locker, or excuse me, an air compressor to go along with my ARB air locker that is in the front axle. So this is a pretty sweet little compressor. It is a 12 volt, puts out about almost 5 cubic feet of air a minute when it's under load. I also picked up the manifold kit so that I can plumb the air solenoid into this and then plumb this separately so that I can run air tools or inflate tires and that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty excited about it. Some of you guys might remember in a previous video I mentioned that I did want to go with a CO2 power tank in this thing. The reason I kind of decided not to do that, kind of the major reason is my local weld supply place where I could get a CO2 tank filled up is about an hour away. And so if I was getting ready to go out on a trail or out on a ride or something and I realized I was out of CO2, I'd kind of be in rough shape. So I decided to go with the 12 volt ARB air compressor. I don't know, I didn't do a ton of research. I've dealt with these before. I just decided that this was going to be my best choice. So let's open this thing up and see what it looks like. Oops. So there's the compressor, all shiny, brand new, still in plastic. We got our instructions guides. I think we can manage. What we do want is this right here, and this is the mounting template. Ooh, you guys can't see that at all, can you? I wonder if I turn that light off. There we go. Kind of see there's a mounting template there, which we do need. So one of the big decisions in the process of installing this thing is figuring out where to mount it. You want to keep it away from heat, away from abrasion, things that might bang into it. I also want to keep it kind of away from the driver's compartment so that when it is running, it's not making a bunch of noise that I can hear. Now, this is a 4-cylinder Cummins diesel in here, and so I doubt I'll be able to hear anything over it when it's running. So I decided to go ahead and mount it in the engine compartment. And about the only place I have space left in here is right here in this front corner. So next to my overflow and power steering reservoir, I think I've got some room in here I can mount it. So we're gonna see how well it fits. That's why I pulled this tire off so that I had room to work over here. Because I think what I'm gonna end up having to do is build a plate that will either weld in or bolt in. I'm not sure if I'll be able to weld it in because I think the way I was test fitting some things earlier, it's gonna have to be able to come out from underneath. So I may have to make it so that it can bolt in there and be removable so that if I need to take the air compressor out, I have that ability. One of the things we've got here is these are little air filters for the compressor, and I want to put these on before I go ahead and figure out where I want to mount it so that I can make sure that I have clearance for everything inside of there. And these screw on right over here where these little plugs are. One thing, if you guys are ever getting into this kind of stuff, these little plastic caps are awesome things to hang on to, but eventually you end up like me where you have a whole drawer full of them. So at some point you don't need to keep them. So, but they are pretty useful for plugging up holes in things like transmissions or engines if you take them apart, or hydraulic cylinders or anything like that. So it's good to have a good selection of those to hang on to so that you have them when you need them. All right, so we got our little air filters on. They don't stick out very far, which is nice. They actually don't stick out any farther than this part of the bracket, which is pretty cool. So let's see if we can fit it where I want to fit it and see what we need to do to make it fit there. And it's all done. Just kidding, it's just sitting in there. I did some test fitting because I wanted to check a few things and see how everything was going to clear. And the good news is I can get, this is just clamped in here. There's just a piece of sheet metal underneath there right now. And it's just clamped, sitting in there. But I can get the air compressor in and out from the top, which makes me happy because being able to just weld whatever I do in here in is going to make things much easier. I do need to relocate this breather line off my power steering, which is not a big deal. There is a little bit of a concern on the clearance from this point and my hood. It does appear to be below these two things, which this is my overflow for the radiator, my power steering here, is I do have the ability to rotate this point here, and this is just threaded in hand tight right now. So it'll probably get a little bit lower when it's all ready to go. So I can rotate this manifold point here a little bit. So if I bring it over this way, should clear no problem. And then I have to figure out where I'm going to mount the other little manifold. So hopefully I can do it without having to make a longer hose. So we'll go ahead and pull this back out, see if we can make ourselves a pattern out of some cardboard and start cutting some steel. All right, so there's our template. Pretty nice and easy. Hopefully everything works. You see I got a little ramp back here. Probably we'll put some dimple dyed holes back here. And then my mounting bracket goes here. These lines indicate the edges of the tube. So the air compressor has to fit within inside of those spaces. So let's take a look at that. Which it should go this way. Everything looks pretty good so far. And I already test fitted it up underneath the rig. So the next step is going to be to cut this out of some steel. Okay, well, it's tacked in there, just barely. I just wanted enough to hold it in place so I could set the compressor on it. You can see how I kind of tried to match this curve. This did come outside of this tube just a little bit here. So up here, you can see the compressor's sitting in there. I am going to need to, you can't really see it, there's the headlight mount there, the bracket. I do need to grind that down a little bit because right now the compressor's touching it. I can get the bolts in, but I don't want it sitting up against that, especially up against this aluminum housing. So I do need to adjust that a little bit. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the air compressor back out of here, get everything cleaned up, make sure everything's right where I want it to be. I am not gonna do like full-on welds with this thing. I don't think it needs it. I'm probably just gonna do 1 inch long stitch welds in a couple, 4 or 5 different places, just to make sure that it's in there nice and solid. Once that's done, we'll go ahead and get it painted, put the compressor back in, and then it'll be time to play with some electrical work, some wiring. All right, she's all kind of welded in there. I didn't go crazy on it. I did, like I said, just a couple of short 1 inch-ish welds, okay? Just a quick side note for any of you guys that are in the market for a welding helmet, let me give you a little argument about why it's good to get a good quality helmet. Here's part of it. So, I don't know if you guys can even see up in there, but for one of these welds, I was actually looking up through here to do the weld. And then for several of them, I was looking through the slat in the grill to see if I could, to see where I needed to do the weld. So why is that important? For a couple different reasons, or why is having a good helmet for that kind of stuff there's a couple different reasons why having a good helmet is good for that kind of stuff. And the first one is, let me show you on my Lincoln helmet here. If you can see this little square sensor right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the sensors that detect the light that causes your helmet to shade. And the more you have of those, the better your helmet works, especially when one or more of those sensors is being blocked by tubing or a grill or your hand or whatever might be in the way from your weld. Another kind of benefit to having a nicer, higher quality helmet is your ability to adjust the sensitivity. So I had mine kind of in the middle. If I was having trouble with it shading, you can turn your sensitivity up and it shades a lot quicker or a lot better. It takes a lot less arc light to get it to shade. Sometimes if your sensitivity is too high, it'll shade just from the lights in your shop or whatever's around you, or even the sunlight in some cases. So that's kind of my case for why it's nice to have a pretty high quality helmet. You absolutely don't need to have these. I've had lots of students weld with Learn, especially if you're just learning, with less or lower quality or lower dollar helmets, maybe not necessarily lower quality. So anyway, that's kind of my case for why it's nice to have these higher, more expensive helmets, because the more sensors you have, the better you can see, or the better it'll work for you. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up a little bit more, mask what we can, cover what we can't mask. I guess it's the same thing as masking, but we're gonna throw some paint on this thing, and then we'll bolt our compressor in. All right, with the air compressor mounted, now I need to figure out where I'm gonna put this little reservoir. And the kit came with this pretty nice piece of braided stainless hose. Unfortunately, it's not really long enough. I don't really have a good location up here to put this little reservoir, which is what my air solenoid mounts into. So I think what I'm going to do is mount this up on the firewall, and then I'll get a longer air hose made so that I can put this up on the firewall where it's kept kind of safe away from anything hot, moving parts or anything like that. And then we can get our air lines plumbed and made and all that good stuff. So it looks to me like if I were to mount this, I kind of like the idea of mounting it vertically, like right here. I think that would work really well. Actually, if I flip this over, my airline can come right into the side of this here really nicely. And my solenoid can go right here in the top of this. And I think have plenty of room, plenty of protection from anything that could possibly damage it. That wasn't too bad. It was kind of a hassle, but we could tuck our wiring around it a little bit more. Now we just got to run our air line from up here at the compressor to our manifold. Hopefully that goes pretty easy too. All right, air hose is run, and I ran it underneath the fender, or actually underneath that tube to right here. Here's my manifold, here's the fitting. This is a crimped together fitting, so I need to pull all this back out and take it back to the auto parts store where I had it crimped, which is Napa. But before I do that, what I want to do is make a mark on the fitting and on my hose so that I can get the fitting clocked back where I had it. Because this is pretty heavy braided hose, and these are not swivel fittings. And so at least the 90-degree part's not a swivel. So if they're not clocked the way I want them, they're going to be really hard to put back in. All right, air locker is all plumbed. You can see I tucked that hose right underneath the fender, and it goes up to my manifold. And you might also notice there's a blue hose coming out of there. I went ahead and plumbed the air line down on top of the axle where it goes. So it plumbs into the air locker. Another thing I did is I went ahead and ran the electrical wiring, and I added another little feature here. This is from VoSwitch. It's just off of Amazon. Pretty cool little feature, little setup. It's got 8 relays in it, so you can So you can wire in up to 8 different switches. And so right now, I only have the 2. I have the air compressor and the locker are plumbed into my switch panel. The funny thing is I bought the 8 switch panel thinking I'd eventually fill it up, and just without going crazy, I've already used all 8 switches. Now I don't have everything in, but I just have the 2 in here now, and that's these 2, and that's so there's my switch panel. I mounted it flush in the dash. This and the headlight or the windshield wiper switch are the only cuts I've had to make in this dash, and this was kind of I really didn't want to have to do this, but I think it looks a lot cleaner, and I wanted to have the synchronized and intermittent wipers in here, so I went ahead and bit the bullet and cut the dash. And then I also added in this USB plug where the cigarette lighter used to go, because I have no need for that anymore. And we'll turn the switch. Oh, air compressor's on. So you can hear the air compressor fired up. You can see these are backlit. All these are in here now. So there's my air compressor. So it's already pumped up, and the locker, so you can hear it. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Let's see, hopefully you guys can see the other tire over there. All right, so right now, this tire the hub is not locked. And so if I lock the hub, put it in lock. All right, so you can see as I'm rotating this tire that the other tire is rotating the opposite direction. And that's a function of the differential in the axle. And when they're open, it's designed so that as you're going around a corner, it lets the inside tires spin at a slower speed than the outside tire. Because if you think about it, the outside tire is traveling in a much longer arc. So now if I flip my locker on, and the air compressor kick on a little bit. And so once the air locker's on, now if I rotate it, you'll notice that the tires both spin in the same direction. And now they are locked together through the air locker. The open differential allows your tires, like I said, to spin at different rates of speed. It also reduces wear on your tires, makes them easier to steer, that kind of stuff. Kind of the downside to them is kind of by default, the tire with the least amount of traction gets all the power. And so if you're spinning and you have a tire in the air or in the mud or in the ice or something like that, that's the tire that's going to get all the power, and that's the tire that's going to spin. So we add in lockers to our axles, to our differentials, and that locks the axle shafts basically together so that the tires spin at the same speed. The rear of my Bronco has a Detroit locker, and so it's a automatic locker. It locks up on its own. I don't have to do anything with it. The front now has what's called a selectable locker, which is that ARB air locker differential. So I can turn that on and off when I want to. All right, everything works. Again, just double checking some things. So one of the kind of the downsides to using this setup, this electric compressor, is it doesn't have a lot of volume. Right now, it just has this little air tank on here, this little manifold. And if I were to use this thing to air up tires, that compressor is going to run a lot. So one of the things I'm going to do in another video is I'm going to add an auxiliary air tank into the back of the Bronco, and that's going to give me a lot more volume. I think I'm going to go ahead and set it up so that I can fill it with air before I would leave on a trip or something like that. That way I don't have to have the air compressor running all the time. I kind of want to use one of the pressure switches that I can use for my boost gauge to give me a digital readout in my Dakota dash. My Dakota digital gauge cluster, I can actually have my air compressor digital readout in there. The problem is the sensor and the stuff for that is about $200, and so I'm not quite sure I want to do that just yet. Maybe someday. I think that's going to do it for this episode of Fabrication 101. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you guys so much. We will see you guys next time on Fabrication 101. If you're liking this content, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that bell icon to subscribe, and subscribe, I guess I should say. And if you like this content, you think you know somebody else who might enjoy it, shoot them a link, share this with them, and we will see you guys next time. And in the meantime, do me a favor, do yourself a favor, and go build something.